And our keynote speaker in this session is Dr. Souter Brown. Connecting research, policy and practice, Dr. Souter Brown's holistic systems thinking led Taylor Francis to name her a global thought leader, following the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, number 3, good health and well-being, number 11, sustainable cities and communities. I shouldn't have to read them out, you should know them all, shouldn't you? Number 13, climate action, and number 15, life on land. Gayle's multidisciplinary approach bridges landscape architecture, public health, and ecology. She is Special Envoy for the She is Special Envoy from the International Federation of Landscape Architects to the International Society of Urban Health. Gayle's research and practice explores human-nature interactions as it impacts stress and hence incidence of non-communicable diseases. She is interested in health promotion, mental health, and sustainable development. And Gayle integrates innate wisdom, indigenous knowledge, and modern-day mixed methods research. Gayle is based between London, England, and her farm in rural Canterbury, New Zealand. Please join me in welcoming Gayle to the stage.
Thank you. Right, which hand, which button? Good morning. So, the conference theme of Living Green struck me as being key to life on the planet, really, is that we need to be focusing on living green. There are huge manufacturing interests out there who are preparing us for a world of fake green. And so it's the living green that provides the health and well-being effects. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this session. So this session, we often say we save the best to last. So when we're talking about health and well-being, what we're doing is we're integrating many of the thoughts and ideas of the presenters over the last day and a half, where we're looking at ecological health as being the foundation for physical and mental health. So we're looking from the soil up. So I come at this from a background of landscape architecture, public health and ecology. And so it's that integration of those three threads that give us this health and well-being effect. So the introduction, in my role as Urban Health Design Lead, I advise and provide advice to a huge range of sectors and organisations, from very small-scale community charitable projects through to large NGOs. And so it is that sort of experience as a practitioner and also as a researcher that we're going to be sort of bringing through the presentation this morning. Of personal note, I live on a farm, so I have 3 acres, about a hectare of garden of my own at home that I can play in, that I can experiment with, I can try out ideas, and then bring the public and test the effects of. I happen to have lived in most climate zones around the world, and likewise worked in most climate zones around the world. And that is relevant to the story because the research that I've conducted, we found a universal effect. And so often in design we find that we have to design for specific members of the community, for a specific demographic, for a specific cultural group. But the fundamentals of nature connection are universal. And David, we're pleased to know that that is hypothesised to come back to biophilia. The idea that we evolved on the plains of Africa, humanity evolved on the plains of Africa and then spread slowly around the world. And so we are hardwired, as it were, to respond to those positive images of life. So a little bit of background to the research. A little bit of background to me also. I'm a self-taught landscape architect. There are very few self-taught landscape architects around the world. And so what I needed to do from the get-go, and the reason for that was because I have what do we call him, a corporate gypsy for a husband. And so I would just be about to start a master's program and he'd say, there's an opportunity going somewhere, and we'd move to a new country. So I got going myself, and so I did an enormous amount of research. And I was interested from the outset in having outcomes-based design. So I was looking to produce a particular effect. And so when I went into a particular client, it was like, what are your needs? Who are these people who you are trying to create this environment for? And then conducting the research that went with that group. And so that was the start of things. So we worked on that knowledge into action, knowledge into practice way right from the outset. About 25 years ago, I suppose, we started on this journey. Let's go backwards. So chronic stress is fundamental to physical health outcomes. So when we talk about non-communicable disease, whether it's obesity or it's heart disease, strokes, or your mental health and well-being, it comes back to how we manage chronic stress. So stress in and of itself is a positive thing. Chronic stress becomes negative. And that's where we get that oxidative stress that has a negative effect on your body. Eventually kill you. So what we're trying to do is keep people alive and well and enjoying life with meaning and purpose. So economic, social and family development needs seeds of hope in these times of climate and biodiversity crises. So there's abundant research, as we've heard around the room, multidisciplinary research around the importance of nature to reduce stress and improve health. What was missing from that research was how to design an environment to create those effects. So the theory suggested that sensory gardens would support healthy lifestyles in what are called apparently well people. So let's go backwards again. We're going to go slightly slowly on these initial slides, and then we can speed up later on, Audrey, you'll be pleased to know. So sensory gardens started out life as a place for the blind, people with sight impairment, to navigate their way through a space and have that sensory integrative experience in a garden specifically designed for blind people. What's happened over the last 20 years is that we have realised that everybody needs to have those sensory integrative experiences, particularly now when we're looking at digital overload and we're looking at a mental health crisis on top of biodiversity and climate change crisis. So we're going back to basics. So what we're talking about here is not technical, it's not tricky, it's very simple, but it's very profound. So these sensory gardens are a concentrated experience of nature. So it's very much an intentional space where we concentrate that dose of nature, if you like. So, my research. What I did was I decided that there was a lot of qualitative research out there already, and urban planners, urban designers, public health professionals weren't taking any notice of it. Back to what Irfan was saying earlier and others, that it wasn't actually affecting that health in all policies, even though that was the mandate overall. And so the randomised controlled trial is the gold standard for medical research. So like trialling a new drug, in this case I trialled vitamin N for nature. And with the randomised controlled trial, basically what you do is you have a control group, so they go about life as normal, and then you have intervention group or groups. So I had 2 intervention groups because I wanted to understand if just being outside in nature was enough to have a wellbeing effect. And so it was a workplace wellbeing study conducted on the university campus. And so the Chancellor of the university was kind enough to give me some space and sponsored my research and said, here you go, I'll fund your research. I did the shoveling, I built my own laboratory, but he funded it. So, randomised controlled trial, 165 participants, and they were 18 to 65 years old. The 2 intervention sites, this plan diagram is the as-built plan of the sensory garden, and you'll see there's quite a lot going on. And it's in 4 zones. So there's a quiet zone, there's a slightly more active, physically active zone. There's spaces to be together, spaces to be alone. And you've got a choice in that space. It's about 900 square metres. It doesn't need to be 900 square metres if you want to go home and try it on yourself, but the space was the available space. Whoops, let's go forward. And again. The comparator intervention space is also 900 square metres, but that's standard architecturally designed, aesthetically pleasing, trees in straight rows, monoculture, seats in straight rows, fixed, with a green outlook, same aspect. So, people were randomised to the groups. They spent 30 minutes once a week for 4 weeks. And they had an appointment with nature. So Tuesday, 2 p.m, Audrey was asked to turn up in the sensory garden. Tuesday, 2 p.m, Bruno was asked to turn up in the plaza, for example. They weren't. But it was that idea that people were assigned to a group and that's where they had to go. There were no rules as to what they did when they were in the space. So they could eat, they could drink, they could sing, they could read, they could sleep, they could walk, they could talk. The only thing they were asked not to do was to use a digital device. And that was across both intervention sites. They were all tested pre-intervention for their salivary cortisol. So cortisol is the stress hormone. So we were looking at a physiological response. And they were also tested for their perceived stress, so how stressed they thought they felt. Their perceived well-being, again, a subjective scale, but these are ratified scales, how they felt, their productivity, their lifestyle, so things like diet and exercise. And then we tested them post-intervention, after the 4 weeks were up. And the results were interesting. They were more than interesting. They were statistically, clinically, and socially significant. So when we talk about statistical significance, that's when the medical fraternity start to sit up and take notice. And so I was talking to a neurologist recently, and she said, we've got to have this information available in the hospitals. Ordinarily, most studies show that when you go into green spaces, standard design, beautiful garden, you have about a 5% reduction in cortisol. In this concentrated sensory garden setting, we had an almost 20% reduction in salivary cortisol after just 30 minutes once a week for 4 weeks. In the middle of their busy working day, in the middle of a busy university campus, was this little oasis of calm, were a very concentrated experience of nature. We also had an almost 10% gain in well-being, and almost 5% gain in productivity. New Zealand has a problem with productivity. This research was conducted in New Zealand, by the way. And so the national average gain for interventions in productivity in New Zealand gets about 2.5%. So we doubled that, again, in just 30 minutes once a week for 4 weeks in this environment. And then from the interviews, because it was a mixed method study, we wanted to understand the background to that quantitative data, the why people had these outcomes. And so they told us spontaneously they felt like going for walks. Spontaneously, they ate more mindfully. They consumed less alcohol. Some stopped entirely. There was one young lady who told me that, I didn't ask him whether he took recreational drugs, and in a country like this that'll be controversial, but he stopped recreational drugs. Again, 30 minutes once a week for 4 weeks. And nobody was told that this was going to be good for them. This was just what they told us happened as a result of. So, when you look at the graph, all that we can report quantitatively are the asterisk results. So we've got that for cortisol up there, so yellow highlighted. Cortisol flourishing, the flourishing scale is a measure of well-being. And down here, the perceived output, work output, is their productivity. But what we can't report, but as qualitative researchers we find interesting, are the trends towards what happened to people in the plaza. And what happened to people in the plaza was a negative effect. So measurable harm from being in that environment that's predominantly hard paved, 60% hard paving, trees in straight lines, seating in straight lines. So in the sensory garden we gave them choice. They could pick up and move their seating. They could choose to sit with other people, choose to sit in the sun or the shade. They could pick and eat food, fruit, herbs, flowers. So, what I want to do now is work through just 6 case study examples of research into action is always interesting. And some of this predates the research of the PhD research, and some of it stays there. But it's that sense of creating a sensory garden, that sensory experience in diverse settings, which is cross-sectoral. So, first example here is from a children's centre, a nursery and children's centre in London. And in here, so this community was at the time the most socioeconomically deprived in Europe. And they had all sorts of social problems. It wasn't safe to be on the streets for me as the designer going in after 3 p.m. That was when the nasty people came out and you wanted to be well out of the way. And so previously the environment was fairly standard sort of playground equipment. There were a couple of trees, there was a bit of grass, but not much, very prescriptive. You could go up, you could go down. So what we did was we took out all the equipment and we put in a playable environment. And it won the award for the best playground in England. And one of the comments from the judges was that they particularly liked the use of edibles. Nobody much thinks to put edibles into a playground. And so we used the wall space to especially fruit trees. And so it's that whole nature connection opportunity that becomes normal, rather than that sense of, Christine was saying, was it? The generational shift, that disconnect from nature, so that we're reconnecting education by stealth, I call it. So it's just what you do where you go. You find food to eat, and plants and trees are part of your daily existence. So we created this very green feeling space that they just went mad over. And equally, so the children did better in their school, but the ripple effect out across the community was profound. And so the social problems that had been there were reversed. So the area now attracts new investment in. There's a waiting list now for the school, where there was flight from the area previously because nobody wanted to live there. Now people are moving into the space. So all we did was invested in children's play in this very direct way. Second case study. Again, a school, but this time older children. Different climate entirely. This was in Moscow. This is the Anglo-American International School. At the time, the Americans' premier international school in the world. And very important children go to this school. And I've been into other schools where children came to school with their nannies. Here, children came to school with their bodyguards. So, this is the before shot. So they had a large play structure that had been donated by one of the parents, and a huge amount of space. So space wasn't an issue, money wasn't an issue. Fire access was important, so that's this big access road across here, which cut right across the playground. And it was curved, so a trip hazard. So the children would be trying to run from there, and they'd fall over, and they weren't very happy about that. One of the design challenges was this playground is under snow for 5 months of the year. So it had to be able to engage the children on a daily basis all year round. Because the children are told to go outside and play, they put on their snowsuits, unless the temperature goes below -19. So when we're sitting here in Qatar, it's quite a contrast. So they're outside every day. Luckily, with climate change, the temperature is warming, so it doesn't often go below minus 19. So what we did was, first thing was, okay, we had to retain the fire access, but we made it level. And we created gardens. And so these two, they weren't interested in the massive new play opportunities that were over on the other side. They were just interested in the little bugs in the dirt, in the soil. And so it's about creating that space for everybody, the science nerds, the football mad, the girls, the boys, everybody in between, that captures their imagination. And we did that in that way of greening this environment. And so here, because again of the snow, it was one of those controversial sort of thought processes where I wanted real grass, always want real grass, but because the snow kills off the real grass, we compromised and said, okay, so we do have artificial grass here, so apologies to the planet, but it's there. But we've got this tunnel going through a mound that we created, and so when it's under snow, you can roll down the side, and there's a roof on top of the tree house there, and so they can get up through there and the snow doesn't go through. So they can get in there and navigate the space, regardless of the weather. And it's that sense again of nature connection being an everyday experience. And it's creating the spaces that allow for that everyday experience of nature. So whether it's in a school, a nursery school, or let's look at the next example, an aged care home in Portugal. We just finished this program recently, and as is so often the case, they had a lovely outdoor space. It was expansive, it was large, it had trees, but it was unused. The staff didn't want to take the residents outside. Some of the residents had dementia, some were on walking frames, and they lived basically in their chairs inside. So what we did was, again, same idea, different sector, different approach, well, same approach, was we created spaces, a large sensory garden. The whole site is a massive sensory garden here. And then we put in some specific things like this sensory pathway. The physiotherapists, the occupational therapists use this now, and what they're finding is that the residents were in pain previously. Well, they're still in pain. But because they were in pain, they didn't want to try something new because it would hurt. It was difficult. It was hard. But now, we talk about soft fascination as part of the stress reduction theory, as part of the attention restoration theories. And so they're distracted by the sound of birdsong, by the wind in the trees, by the beautiful flowers that have just come into bloom this week, because it's a garden of year-round seasonal interest. And because they're distracted, they don't feel the pain. And so they try new therapies. And so the therapy staff are reporting that the residents are so much more engaged. Again, using the sensory garden. Different sector we've worked in, eco-resorts. Large 50-acre site in Sabah, Borneo in Malaysia. The neighbouring resort had orangutans. And when you're working with an eco-resort, with a business, you've got to find a unique selling point, as I do in my business, as anybody does in their business. So how do you compete with orangutans? And that was my first foray into butterflies. I thought, right, there's no way that we're going to bring in orangutans here. So we swapped out the planting to attract butterflies. So we needed host plants. We needed nectar-rich plants, the food for the butterflies. So we created, it happened to be convenient that there was a courtyard that was close to the hotel kitchens, and so we created a courtyard there surrounded by butterflies. All of a sudden, the business has their own unique selling point. So people now go there, so they've boosted their visitor numbers, they've boosted their turnover of the business because of what we've done in creating the sensory experience in the space. And because it was right on the beach, you couldn't ignore the marine environment. So out on a promenade, so if you imagine this sort of curved space of a bay, we then put a small jetty pier timber decking structure out to a little pop-up bar venue thing out on the water, but put in glass windows in the floor, which then meant that the hotel had to improve their environmental credentials and make sure they didn't put any of the hotel waste into the water. So every time we're looking at ecological health to boost the human health and well-being, and you can sell health and well-being. So on land we use plants, on the sea we use glass floor windows into a pristine environment. Case study 5, Birmingham Children's Hospital is part of Birmingham Women's and Children's Hospital. It's the largest hospital in the UK. And they have an adolescent mental health ward, which long stay residents. These kids have major problems, that they have a school on site, that's how long they stay in hospital for. And so the hospital system was keen to get these children back home as quickly as possible. So again, we went in and developed a sensory garden for these kids. And in each place there are slightly different considerations, but the effect is the same, that we're reducing stress by creating that particular environment, that concentrated experience of nature, where people have got choice, where people have got that sense of control. And our final example was Christchurch International Airport. Fun fact, when you decrease stress levels, you get an 11%, apparently, so I'm told, increase in retail sales. Which is why cafes put in green walls so that you stay longer, drink more coffee, which is why airports bother to put in palm trees and lovely garden areas so that you will spend more. So, Christchurch International Airport was rebuilt after devastating earthquakes in 2011. And this is what they were given by their designers. And so we have a green space. But if you were paying attention to the first slide, it looks remarkably like the plaza of my comparative intervention site. We know that did measurable harm. We don't know the effect this is having. But we do know that the chief exec is not happy. Airport visitors feel unsatisfied. The best green space is actually here outside the smoking shelter. Not everybody smokes. And the people who don't smoke, the non-smokers, feel particularly aggrieved that, what about them? So that design detail wasn't translated into that, shall we use the term biophilia, that very nature-based, adaptive, sensory-rich space. These areas often, so they don't need to be hard paved. Yes, you've got to have, this is the main thoroughfare from the airport, your main doors out into the arrival entry. That absolutely you need hard paving for the foot traffic. But off to the side, not at all. And so those are the sort of opportunities where we can put in permeable paving, that soft acoustic effect, which then has an impact on sustainable urban drainage. It has an effect on the urban heat island effect. It creates habitat for microorganisms, macroorganisms, which then feed into the health and well-being effect. It wouldn't be a complete presentation if we didn't talk about maintenance. Too often landscape architects are criticised because we come up with great ideas that look wonderful when they're brand new and then are really hard to maintain. Or the client has no money, no budget to maintain them. So what we always say is that any designscape that we create, that we design, needs to be low maintenance. ideally organic, because we're not going to get the health and wellbeing effects if we use things like glyphosate, the dreaded Roundup, which does have links with cancer, does have links with collapse of beehives. It's a neurotoxin. It's just recently been linked with Parkinson's disease. But it's very convenient. And as a horticultural industry, as a forestry industry, as agriculture industries around the world know, it's very convenient and it's very cheap. So it's a marketing success for Monsanto, but it's a disaster for us as end users of. So, interactive. This maintenance regime, too often we preclude any involvement from the users of the space. We say, no, that's our job, we'll do it. If we allow people to get in touch, to be involved, to actually get up close, to touch, to do some weeding perhaps. There's a lovely example in Gillen's Garden in Sweden, where they turned the space over. The city didn't have any budget for maintenance of the park. They turned it over totally to the local community. And people had their own tree. And it's public space, but they came through with their secateurs and they did their own pruning. And they put their own seats in there and they made it their own. So those are the basic principles of maintenance. So to summarise then, if we're going to create these livable cities, it's not enough just to plant trees. It's not enough to know that we can use vertical systems, horizontal systems, water-sensitive systems. It takes that very carefully considered design consideration. It doesn't need to cost any more at all. In fact, it often costs less. Where the cost comes is that upfront cost for that design thinking. Because there's a lot to consider to bring all those elements together. But actually, as we've seen, it's quite simple. We need to be able to create those feelings of safety, refuge, and connection. Connection with self, because so often actually we're not, as Christine will tell you, and connection with others, and connection with nature. So, if you have any questions, please get in touch over time. So if you go away next week and you think, oh, I wonder what Gayle would say about this, please do get in touch. So multiple ways to do so. Shukran, merci. Thank you.